Welcome to Big Brave Business. This is a podcast built on the belief that you can create absolutely anything for yourself. Whether it's a dream job or a dream life, it's all possible for you.
I'm Amanda Nelson, a virtual assistant and digital marketer, and that's Sarah Heater, podcast producer and strategic consultant. Each week, we will share insights from working with dozens of clients, stories of how we got where we are, and encourage you to see us as your new business besties.
So grab a cup of coffee and let's talk being brave in business.
Hey, Sarah.
Hi, Amanda.
How are you today?
I'm doing good. I'm excited for this episode.
This is one that I'm really excited about because it's one of my favorite topics, and it's clients.
Yeah. So I hate when people say this, but let's just
Jump in.
Amanda.
Let's just uncover it. Let's just do it.
Who was your first client and how did you get your first client?
Yeah. So if you're just now listening to us and you didn't listen to the intro and you fast forwarded through it, I'm a virtual assistant. And my very first client was a life and business coach. Her name is the fabulous Doreen Corba. I still work with Doreen, love Doreen. She was so patient and wonderful because I was just going down this journey of trying to figure out what my business was going to look like and how I was going to work with clients. I tell people all the time that are interested in becoming a virtual assistant, I got very lucky right out of the gate. And I want to say that because I know a lot of people who have tried to become virtual assistants talk about how hard it is to find clients. So I start off by telling everyone that I was lucky enough to be hired by a virtual assistant company called Alpine Virtual. They are the company that I work through now majority of the time. And they gave me Doreen Corba as my first client. And she taught me, I learned so much through that very first experience with her. And I don't think I could have gotten luckier because she, as you know her too, she has the most maternal, like nurturing spirit about herself. So she was super patient and understanding. So she was my very first client. I talk about her in the past tense, but she's still very much so my client. We actually celebrated our 1 year of working together just this past week. So she's a great person. And yeah, she was my first. How about you? Who was your very first client you ever signed and how did you get them?
Okay, so that's an interesting way to phrase it, that I signed, because my very first client actually was the podcast that I was working on in my previous job. So I shared in a previous episode, shout out to you if you're back again and you're listening to us again and you already listened to that episode. And also shout out to you if you're brand new and you haven't listened to that episode yet. And
Welcome.
This is your first one. Either way, we're so happy that you're here. And anyway, I shared on a previous episode that I had been laid off. My position was eliminated. And one of the things I did in that role, I was a director of marketing and operations. And one of the things I did for the two small business owners of that company was I helped them launch and grow their podcast. And so it was not the first podcast I had ever launched. I had launched podcasts for myself, friends, etc. And then I helped them get their podcast launched while I was obviously employed there. And they loved it so much and thought I was so good that they and the other people who worked in that company kept on telling me, you should do a podcast business. And they were trying to refer me to their colleagues and all of this. And I was like, I don't know about entrepreneurship. I'm just going to work here. And I don't know that I really have the bandwidth to do both. But when my position was eliminated, I said to them, okay, but are you going to keep doing the podcast? Because I helped you build this and I want to keep doing it. And even though at that time, which this is a whole other story, but even though at that time I didn't have a vision of specifically doing a podcasting business, they were officially my first client because I continued working on their podcast as like a 1099 contracted employee instead of a W-2 employee. So yeah, that's how it started.
Question for you about this. Do you not find it fascinating that the job you have now found you so naturally? Like podcasting really just came to you because you had the opportunity to help somebody grow their podcast, right?
It did. It's weird. Like the whole story is weird and that's a whole other podcast, but like I also was resistant to it too
Mm,
because I was like, but that doesn't feel like my life's purpose. And it's like, you guys, it doesn't necessarily have to be, and that's okay.
yeah, that makes perfect sense. So you talked about you're the first podcast that you started working on, but what industries do the people that you work with typically like? What are their shows like and what do they do? What's their industry?
And that's so funny because it's so diverse now and I love it. And it
It's
like makes
awesome.
me laugh. But when I first started, so that initial podcast was or is, it still is in real estate. And I had mentioned in a previous episode that my business was built on referrals. And so a lot of the initial shows that I worked on were from real estate professionals. But now there's, I work with business coaches. I work with a podcast that is very Christianity focused for Christian women. I work with somebody that's very Judaism focused about living your Jewish life your way, primarily for Jewish women. And I work on a podcast about running a pet business. I work on a podcast about starting a subscription box. I mean, there really are so many things. And coming up in 2023, we have podcasts coming that are about travel, podcasts that are about outdoor education, podcasts about Black history, podcasts that are about social work and therapy. I mean, there are literally like the diversity in topics is hysterical and so interesting because now I'm listening to all of these podcasts. What about you? What kind of industries are your clients from?
Very, very similar to you that there is so much diversity. I work with business coaches, money coaches, life coaches. I also work with a number of nutritionists and dietitians. And I also work with some people that are that work in wellness. But I also work for people that are one of my most, I think is so just unique. I also work with a client who represents movie sets in California. And so my job is to help them with their admin and organization. They basically find locations for movies, which is really neat. I also work with a couple of marketing agencies and social media planning companies. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else or anyone else that's really out there. That's really it. But it's a very diverse group and specifically in needs. And because everybody has their own niche. Do you say niche or niche?
I say niche, but
Okay.
I mean, I think they're both officially correct.
Everybody has their own niche. Niche. Okay.
That way you get one of each. You get
There you
one of
go.
us that
You're
says
welcome.
niche and one that says niche.
If I'm saying this wrong, somebody better let me know. So everybody has their own category and what they do inside of their industry. So it really does keep it interesting. So even though I might work for, 4 different business coaches, one specializes in nervous system and the way that you work in business, one works strategically only with money. And then I have others that really work only for how your life affects your business. So it's a diverse group. And anytime that I try to, it's also what makes it so hard to describe your job as a virtual assistant to someone, because all of the tasks and all of the clients are so different, but it's also what makes it so exciting, to your point too.
How many hours do you work with each client?
So everybody is varied. I work basically on a package basis of hours. So at the beginning of every month, and Sarah knows this, by the way, if you're just tuning in, Sarah is one of my clients. I didn't even mention that I also work with a podcast
I was gonna
manager.
say it just to be a little shit.
You
But
so should have. It's so hard because I think of you as more of a friend, but I also work for a very talented podcast manager. Her name is Sarah K. Heater. She's also one of my clients. And as Sarah knows, I work on an hourly basis, but it's done by block of time. So at the beginning of every month, the client comes and says, okay, I want to spend X amount of hours this month. And that's how much time we have. Now they have the option to add additional time if we run out, but they contract and pay upfront for a certain amount of hours. So I have clients that are 4 to 6 hours a month. And then I also have clients that are upwards of 60, which again is what makes it so neat is everybody has their own varying degrees of needs. So when I tell people that I have almost 30 clients, they're like, there's no way you can do quality work for that many people. And I'm like, yeah, but here's the deal. Some of these clients I literally talk to 4 hours out of every month. That's it. Now, the people that I have more for, the work is different, So does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's interesting because as somebody who you work with, I had no idea. And again, this probably needs to be a whole episode just talking about like what this looks like of what you do and how we work together. But I had no idea how many hours I needed. Like, I don't know how long things are going to take. And so working with an agency was helpful because they had sort of suggestions of where to start, and then you can kind of figure it out as you go. And obviously you're a really good communicator, so it's easy to know where I was and when it was time to step up. Also, it would be very easy to do the reverse and to step back if that happened. I'm going the other way. But I also think it's funny to think about. For me, we started at 20 hours a month. And for me, getting 20 hours a month from you is amazing. Like, that's 20 extra hours of time. And that's crazy. But when you break it out like by week, that's only like 5 hours a week. That's like half a day, right?
Yeah.
Half of one day a week, essentially, I would get Amanda. And of course, we've inched up from there. But yeah, so when you think of it that way, like depending on how many days of the week you're willing to work and how many hours a day you're willing to work, like you could easily accommodate 30 clients. And especially considering that there are several clients that are significantly less than that, like hours a month is basically 1 hour a week. That's very doable.
It's totally doable. And yeah, we can deep dive into that. But I want to talk to you more about your clients and what your relationships look like with your clients. I know we talk about all the time about how like we're friends and you're a client of mine. I want to know how you operate with your clients in forms of like a relationship.
It's so funny because I don't know what my clients would say in reverse. Obviously, I know that the relationship is very positive because they still work with me, right?
Right.
So
we would hope
it's a very positive relationship and I get like really good feedback. But because what I do is listening to their podcast content every week, I feel like very close to my clients. I know them so well because I hear not just their podcast episodes every week, but I hear the raw recording. So I hear the stumbles and I hear the frustration and I hear the imposter syndrome and I feel the insecurity. And like, so I feel like I know them and their businesses and the way their minds work so intimately. And I've always had this problem actually, even in corporate, where like, I think my work friends are real friends. And I don't know if it's necessarily.
There has never been a more Sarah comment in all of the days I've known you. I have this problem thinking everybody's my friend.
I really do. Like if we're nice to each other, if we sit together at an event and we get along really well during the event, in my head, we're friends now. So like,
I mean, I'm coming to your family reunion. We're close.
if we
It's so true.
If we have a positive interaction, I basically consider you a friend. So, if you're looking for friends, I'm your girl because
Please rub off on me. I'm the complete opposite.
I genuinely like to think I'm easy to be friends with, but I have to remind myself in these client relationships that like this is a working relationship and I am essentially a contracted person performing a service for them, and it's not necessarily, but there are people who, especially during the launch process, it can be so vulnerable and there can be so much insecurity and imposter syndrome anytime you're putting yourself out there to do something new, that really working through that with clients, I do think it's common to get very close to those clients. And I do have clients who very much express that they consider me a friend, and is that okay? Can they call me a friend? Which is so funny. I think like when money is being exchanged, we're all sort of like nervous. And there's also that nervousness that kind of is like dating, where you don't want to come on too strong. And I think you and I have had this a lot of like
Yes.
instant soulmates, but also I can't say that, it's too much. So I don't want to scare her off, right? And so I think like I've had that with a lot of clients, but there is a lot of vulnerability that goes into recording podcasts. And so, and a big part of what I do is supporting the strategy piece. I like to say I am so good at giving pep talks. It's one of my specialties. It's one of my specialties with my friends, with my kids, with my clients. And so, especially during the launch process, we tend to get pretty close. But what about you? What's your relationship like with, other than me, which obviously like we started a podcast together. So
it's going pretty well. It really depends on the client and the client size, I've noticed. So very similar to you, I have a lot of friendships with the clients that I work with, primarily because they themselves are entrepreneurs and they don't have someone to bounce ideas off of. And so I do have a really close relationship with most of my clients who choose to. Now, I do have a couple of more corporateized, I would say, like they have a full team of people and I'm support. And I don't really have much conversations with them. Now, I would say out of the, we'll just say 30 clients, I would say 25 of them are very friendly, very open. I can tell you about their spouse and I can tell you about what's going on with their business, their hopes, their dreams. That to me is one of the sweetest, greatest gifts of this job that was so unexpected. It really is. And that's why I feel so fulfilled too, I think, is because clients are so open and willing to be like, listen, my kid's got COVID, or even I am burned out. I don't want to think about this anymore. And that to me tells me you trust me. You know, this is a safe space. You can send an email to me about anything and we're good, you know? So very close relationships. They ask about, you know, me and what I'm doing and, you know, what my weekend plans are. And it's very genuine, you know, and it's also because not only like, unlike corporate where you're just see each other face to face, you have the ability of a lot of emailing, a lot of voice messaging. You know, I'm always voxing with, if you don't know what voxing is, it's a Voxer is an app. Sarah hates it. I use it all. Sarah hates it.
I use it all the time.
You do use it, but you don't love it. She doesn't love audio messages, so I love to send them to her. But, you know, I'm always audio messaging, texting, phone calls. So there's a lot of open lines of communication that I think you don't get with any other kind of field, except for the kind of relationship you get when you're helping somebody build their business, whether it's a podcast or it's admin work or it's their marketing plans. And I also love to think that I know I do. One of my main gifts, your gifts is pep talk. I feel like my gifts and one of my gifts in business and in life is to be very authentic. So I promised myself when I left corporate that I was never going to be fake again. You know how you have to put like the work face on and you go to work and you smile, hey, you know, how was your weekend? My goal is to always, when I meet with clients, to be completely authentically myself. If I had a bad night of sleep, I will say, hey, I'm struggling today. Playing catch up mentally. I am trying to get on the same page as you. There's something about that vulnerability of also being human to human that you don't get in a corporate situation or an office situation. I have found that is incredibly rewarding. So great relationship with majority of my clients. I consider family, and I would hope that if they ever decide they didn't need a virtual assistant anymore, I would still be obsessed with them.
Yeah. Well, on the off chance that any of my clients are listening to this, I do want to say about Voxer.
Oh, no, I got you in trouble.
No, I do want to say this. I'm on it for a reason. I know that it's easier for a lot of people, and I know a lot of people love it. The reason why I have let Amanda in on why, and now you listening, on why I struggle with Voxer sometimes is because, first of all, my work hours are very weird and I have a big family. So I am often not alone. And so getting a voice memo, I then have to put headphones in or excuse myself in order to listen to it. Or I can listen to it pretty privately, like holding it up to, I'm holding my phone up to my ear. Like you can see me, but this is an audio only podcast. I can put it up to my ear and listen pretty quietly, but then I can't respond out loud conveniently because I'm with family or whatever. And so that is part of it. Another part of it is if I am working, if I am at my desk, then I'm either on a meeting or I'm doing something with audio. So it means I have to literally drop what I'm doing in order to listen to that voice memo and respond and then go back to work. Whereas if it's in text, I can multitask better. And so that is part of why it can feel sometimes really disruptive, especially if it's switching from client to client. Like if I'm working on one client's stuff and I get a voice memo from another client, my brain has to make that switch from one account to another, which I know you do that too, because you're like multitasking with different client projects a lot. It feels very disruptive. That's the best way I can say it. And especially long ones, because it's like getting a voicemail. And except at this point, I don't even listen to my voicemails. I read them. They're transcribed. So it's like, it feels so strange to me that we've somehow gone from nobody wants to call each other, so we'd all prefer to email or text. And now people all want to leave voice memos. But I understand that everybody else loves it. It's fine. So I do that with clients as well. What do you think? Because you mentioned some of the pros and cons of client work or like being a service-based business, but what do you think some of the major pros and cons are?
For sure, starting with I'll say this because it has a pro and a con. One thing that I love about this business is majority of my clients are not in my time zone, right? So I have a client that's in Israel. I have most of my clients are in the Pacific Northwest. So they're on Pacific time. And then I am in Central Standard Time. So one of the biggest blessings is I am naturally an early riser. So if I get up and I start work at 6, it's 4 a.m. where they are. So I have hours in the morning where I have time to myself to get caught up. Where it does become a challenge is whenever for them, 4 o'clock in the afternoon is still working hours. Where for me, I'm not taking a meeting at 6 o'clock my time, 4 o'clock their time, right? So it does become a challenge sometimes, but I find it to be a bigger benefit that there is a time difference there, right? Even when it comes to like Eastern time, giving me an extra hour before they get their day started is super valuable. That's one of the biggest pros and cons that I don't think a lot of people consider or think about when they set their working hours, which is why I say, yes, technically I quote unquote work 8 to 5 Central Standard Time. I don't really, because I try my very best to accommodate clients that are all over the world. My client in Israel, it's midnight where she is, and it's 7 a.m. where I am, so I will accommodate her earlier times. Luckily, I don't mind being up early. So that's one of the biggest pros and cons. Also, the con of having that awesome relationship with clients. And this is something I am just to the point now where I'm like, okay, I really need to dial this in, is when people feel like they have unlimited access to you, it can sometimes blur the lines between, yes, we're friends. Yes, you pay me and I work for you. And yes, I am 100% invested in the success of your business, but I also have to have dinner with my husband. And also having the ability to set boundaries in general, which I think is all kinds of work, but is extremely unique when you work from home and clients feel like they do have that ability. And I want them to. I want my clients to feel like I am accessible to them. My goal is to provide you value, but also I have to have a life. And it can be really challenging to set those boundaries, because when I see a notification pop up over the weekend, it is almost near impossible for me to not look at it. Because I do want, like I said, to be accessible and to give my clients like the best possible value. That in itself is the biggest pro con. What about you?
It's funny because in some ways it's kind of opposite. Like, I think big pros for me would be, you know what? Actually, I'm going to reverse this. I'm going to start with cons because I hate ending on negative stuff. I think one of the hardest things for me in doing client work and service-based business is that the time zone thing is crazy. Now, part of that is because I live in Arizona and we do not change our clocks. So what time zone I'm in changes depending on what time of year it is. And then also working with people in a bunch of other time zones where their time literally changes. So like time zones have always
I
given me
hate
trouble.
it.
Listen, I'm a like really well-educated person. I have 2 bachelor's degrees and a master's degree. I aspire to have a PhD. Like I am a smart person, but time zones are the bane of my existence. Okay. And then, but pros, I would say there's so many. Like a big one for me is that the people that I'm working with are other small business owners and entrepreneurs. So there is so much respect, even unspoken respect for boundaries in the clients that I work with in my client relationships. So if I want to take time off, or if it's my birthday, or if it's a major holiday, they want me to take time off, right? And if they do send a message, they'll put, and I try to do this with you, Amanda, as
You
well,
do.
but they try to put in the like subject line, not urgent, do not read until you come back from your trip. Like they're so respectful. And if I happen to text them or email them on time that's quote unquote off, they'll say like, aren't you supposed to be off right now? Like
Yeah, I've gotten
they
a
are
couple
good
of
about
those.
it, and I think we're in this position where it's like we all want to have boundaries in our lives, and so we also are supportive of each other's boundaries. And then
Yeah.
the other major pro that I would say in client work / service-based business is that turnover is not the end of the world. And this is very much influenced by starting my business from a layoff where it was catastrophic to have somebody decide not to pay me anymore, right? And
Right.
that was catastrophic for my family economically. And now, not that honestly, I've been very blessed with very little turnover, but if there is a client that turns over, or if there's a client that's having a hard time or going through some big life thing and they need to pause, it's not catastrophic because I have
Yeah.
this whole book of business. And so it kind of goes into that like multiple streams of revenue thing, which is a whole other conversation. But
Mm-hmm.
just having client work feels like multiple streams of revenue because you have all these different accounts where if one of them turns over, or if one of them needs to step back or downsize or take a break or whatever, you still have money coming in from all of these other places and the ability to take on additional work to compensate. So that's a huge pro for me. And it's a huge part of why I wanted to build a business this way.
That makes perfect sense. Do you have any interesting client stories? This was not one of the prepared questions, but I'm just totally curious. Have you had a negative, or how
You
about
mean like
this?
spilling tea
Yeah,
kind of
100%.
stories?
She knows exactly who I am.
Yes.
I
Oh,
want the dirt.
yes.
I want the
Okay,
dirt.
yes, I do. And
Okay.
this person was never a client, so I do not feel bad saying this. They paid me $0.
I want you to know
I
that I'm
had
literally pulling up my seat closer to my microphone. I'm so excited. Tell me all of
I
it.
had a sales call, which I do. I do not do typical sales calls. I do strategy calls. So you do a free strategy session with me, and I call it a 90-minute strategy session. What it is for 45 minutes, we do podcast launch strategy where, and really it's about launch growth and monetization, but it is my signature strategy for launching a podcast successfully. So that's 45 minutes. Then there's time for questions and also to talk about my actual services if you want to work with me, because strategy is a big part of what I do. And that's why my shows get success. So I give a lot away for free
You
when I
do.
do these calls. And that is a choice
Yeah.
because first of all, I think it's important that people get an understanding of what it's like to work with me.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to have the same priorities if we're going to work together. So you have to be willing to be strategic about your show. If you're not, then it's not a good fit. Right?
Yeah.
Like find an editor off Fiverr. You know what I mean?
And good luck.
And it's up to you. I hope you have great success, but that's totally up to you. And also you have to like me. So I like really need you to get to know me and how I communicate and what I'm like, and let's spend time together. And
This
I also
100%, by the way, to interrupt you, goes back to your thought about everybody is Sarah's friend.
everybody's my friend. We're going to become friends on this call. If we're friends after this call, we'll work together. And if we're not, then we won't. And it's fine. I did this sales call and it was a referral. And so I was excited. And right away, it was one of those things where I like had a feeling, you know what I mean? This person not only declined working with me, which is fine. People do all the time. It's fine. I'm not for everybody.
Right.
And my services are not for everybody. And that's okay. But the reason for not working with me was financial gymnastics of explaining why they couldn't pay for it, which also like the math blatantly just did not add up, which I don't care. You don't have to justify it. You can just say no. No is a full sentence. That's our millennial motto, right? Like no is a full sentence.
Yes.
And so it's fine. You don't have to work with me. Like there's no love lost. But then this person went on to not only DIY their podcast, but to start an entire Instagram account about why you should not pay somebody a ton of money to help you with your podcast, that there are all these people trying to sell you expensive podcasting services, but here's how you start a podcast for free.
What?
Using my signature strategy.
Shut your mouth, Sarah. How have I not heard about this story? Are you kidding me?
Oh my gosh. And at first I hate followed. I will not lie. At first I hate
you
followed.
Had better.
And I was like, every time they would post, I would stare at the post. I would be like, this is literally, because after our calls, I always send like a PDF of what
a lot
we
of
talked
value
about in the call. And this person did not use my literal like graphics or design or my words, but it was my strategy just on graphics they made in Canva. You know what I mean?
I am
and then all these digs about people wanting to pay for expensive services when you can do it for free. And so what I ended up doing is I don't know if you remember this, but I did a whole social media series about how podcasting is not free. Even if you DIY it, it costs money and time, and your time is money. So at the very least, it's costing you time, and it is your choice how much you choose to invest in your podcast, both in time and in money. And then I unfollowed, and I slept better at night. Although occasionally I would go see is this person still teaching workshops about this?
Shut your
not kidding.
mouth.
Yeah, it evolved.
You literally inspired their business.
And then I don't think it went anywhere. Then they were offering to edit other people's podcasts. Like, here, I'll produce your podcast. But I don't think there were any bites because it has gone away. The same person sent me a DM months later asking if I would be interested in being a sponsor for an event they were holding.
You are literally
it would be such good exposure for me.
Shitting me.
No, the audacity of people. I did not even answer.
Listen to me. If I had a tenth of the audacity that some of these people do, I am blown away. That was that was better than any story I had ever even imagined you were going to tell. What a jerk. Okay. All right. Well, that was a great story.
You? Do you have any good client stories?
Like horror stories? Yes, I do. I have a couple. Mine are not near as long or as near as good as yours, but I had, when I very first started, I had been given this client. I'm going to also keep it pretty generic. So I had this male client. It was going to be the first male I had ever worked for, which doesn't really matter, but how they approach communication, how they approach business is just naturally different, right? It's a different energy. This person had an idea for a startup. Now, previously, and we haven't really gotten into our history of our work or what we've done previously in experience, but I had worked briefly for a startup incubator. And so this guy wanted to work with me because I had history working with brand new companies. So his idea, okay, are you ready for this? His idea was birthed out of the pandemic and what his thought process was. And when I tell you what it is, you're going to be like, wait, what? And that's exactly the point. Okay. So just prepare yourself. His startup idea was to take a restaurant and let someone from another restaurant, food truck, whatever, basically come to another restaurant and be the chef using their restaurant as kind of like a rental, not even a rental, just like an event. So, hey, we're going to have this special chef. They're going to pay you a portion of the proceeds to let them use your kitchen, right? And you both will make money because there's going to be this chef, right? Okay, you're with me? Okay, stupid idea already, right? Okay. And so I tried to tell him, listen, this idea is never going to work. First of all, restaurants don't give a shit about who you're bringing in unless it's a celebrity. Is it Gordon Ramsay? Is it Anthony Bourdain? They do not care unless it's a celebrity chef. I tried to pitch the idea that he should instead think of it from a social standpoint, try to pair up with influencers and let the influencers basically do a pop-up in restaurants, right? I think there's a market for something similar to that. He was sold on his idea. He was completely convinced that, hey, why wouldn't a restaurant allow another chef to come in? They don't have to pay for the labor and they would make money based off of the chef. And I'm like, but you're thinking that the chef is going to have a following. And I couldn't tell you, and where I live, we are a big foodie town. I can't tell you half the names of the chefs of the major restaurants where I live. And I'm a foodie, right? Okay. So I've set the premise. So we start working together, and I'm telling him over and over again, my job was to go find restaurants in the LA area. This was the task, to approach these companies and say, hey, would you ever be interested in this idea? Right. Of course, everybody was like, screw off. No, we have a great chef. Why would we want your chef? Which was, to be fair, my thoughts as well. I didn't take it personally. I take very little personally. And so I went through this whole thing. We're talking weeks of work. I keep telling him, hey, bro, this ain't working. Well, because he was so sold that his startup was the best, the next Uber, he asked me, this is where things go south. Okay. He asked me if I will. He didn't even ask me. He told me. He said, I want you to download this app onto your browser, and it will work as your time tracker, which I am a virtual assistant. I have a time tracker that I use personally, internally, of how I bill my clients. But this time tracker, what he failed to mention is it documents every single site that you go to, how long you're on the site, what you type on the site. Basically, he wanted me to download a time tracker to my computer so that he could then follow whatever I'm doing, because I was not getting the results he was thinking he deserved to get, which was all these restaurants saying yes. He thought that it was then my fault because I wasn't trying. And he was saying, there's no way that nobody is saying yes to this. This is a brilliant idea. And I'm like, I'm literally telling you, it's not going to work. So I tell him I'm not downloading this tracker. It's just not happening. I'm not doing it. So we get on a phone
Unless
call.
you provide the computer to me, you cannot track on
Thank you. And absolutely not. Okay. This is my personal and my work computer. I do personal stuff on this computer. You've lost your mind if you think I'm going to put something
for other clients. You think the other clients would
Exactly.
be okay with this? I'm betting not.
I mean, I have all of my clients protected, obviously, but I still have clients' passwords, credit card information, their business information, addresses. I don't know this person.
Even just proprietary information. Like, you don't need to know.
Exactly. So he pushes back so hard to the point where he's like, well, I just don't know if we can work together anymore. And this lady and gentleman, yeah, exactly. And this lady and gentleman is why it is wonderful to work with an agency. I went to Nicole, who is the owner of Alpine, and I told her, hey, I can't work with this dude anymore. Never heard from him again. Don't know if his business ever took off. I'm assuming he's still out there somewhere in the ether, just trying to find a restaurant that will allow him to do this horrible, stupid ass idea. That's my story.
The question isn't really if his business ever took off, because we already know that idea, the reasons why that idea is not going to work. The real question is, did he find a virtual assistant or team to support him that he trusts?
That he could micromanage.
Like he's getting what he wanted from. Okay, I do not want to leave off on bad stories, so we have to end with something positive.
Do we know? Okay.
So yes. What's one of your, how about this? What's one of your biggest learning lessons from starting to work with a client?
Probably my biggest learning lesson that I could, share with our listeners that would be valuable to them, because that's my goal, is to provide value for someone who may want to do something similar to what we do. The greatest lesson was, people want you to be your real authentic self. They really do. And that goes with being able to admit when something is not in your wheelhouse. And I originally, when I started my business, was like, I want to be everything to anybody that wants to work with me. I can learn anything. I can teach myself anything. And I actually interviewed with a client, and he was looking for someone to do HR and billing and their payroll. I am now very confident in the fact I have in my entire life had very big issues with math and numbers. It's incredibly intimidating to me. Anytime I see a number with a letter, why are we doing this? at the time was like, oh, I could do that. I can do your billing. I can do your invoicing. That's not a problem. Now, can I set up an invoice and send an invoice for somebody? Sure. Can I set up a contract and send it to somebody with numbers on it? Sure. If you are asking me to quantify someone's working hours and put it to a percentage and include tax and then taking out the information that's needed for a 401, no, I'm immediately not interested. But at the time, because I wanted to start my business, I was so eager. I told him yes. I think he could tell that I had no confidence in that. And that's why I didn't land that client. But that was a lesson in itself. When I do interview with someone who's interested in hiring a virtual assistant, they say, what's something you're not good at? Or they'll even come to me and say, this is what I need. I need somebody that's going to do marketing, who can also manage my calendar and set up a new process. But I also want somebody who can help me with, paying my employees. I'll be the first one to say, great, guess what? I can do all of those things. I'm not doing your payroll. It's not in my wheelhouse. I would not be good at it. And if I don't get the client, because I can't do that one thing, I'm saving us both a lot of heartache because I wouldn't do it right and you wouldn't be happy with it and I wouldn't feel confident in it. So being your authentic self to what your skill set is the absolute key to, one, keeping clients, but also your overall happiness. Amanda, speaking to myself. So being able to say, yeah, that's not mine, that's not my thing, is the biggest thing that I learned and continue to do to this day. Like, you can say no, like, that's not my thing. What about you?
I think the biggest lesson that I've learned from working with clients is that I can trust myself, that me being me and having the skills and the talent and the experience and the work ethic and the reliability and the list, whatever all the traits are, me being me is enough to be successful. And I think there's something really intimidating in putting yourself out there for a stranger for the first time and being like, trust me. And not just trust me, but also pay me. Like, those are two big asks. And I think in like corporate or in a W-2 job, they hire you in such a way that you don't really have to trust each other, because there's a system or a process in place if it does not work out. Like, there's a certain level of trust that has to happen if you're going to like have nuclear codes or something, but like, you know what I mean? But generally speaking, there's processes and systems in place. Like, this is just me. I'm just a person on the internet who's like, hey, pay me money and trust me with your voice and your vision. Right. And that's intimidating. That's actually, I could like kind of get back into an intimidated mindset if I think about that too hard. That's like a lot to ask somebody, you know what I mean? And I think that's part of the benefit of, in your situation, working with an agency, because then if people are coming to you through the agency, then they know that they have to trust the agency, but that's the same as trusting, like, you go to a restaurant, you trust that they're going to follow like protocol, right? Yeah. Whereas for me, it's like, I could be somebody they found off of Instagram. And it's like, I just have to build trust with that person to be like, pay me lots of money, and also get very vulnerable and like put your business into my hands, right? Also, coming off of getting laid off, my trust in myself was very low. Although getting laid off, like my job being eliminated, had absolutely nothing to do with me adding value, and had everything to do with a complete pivot in business. So many people had their jobs eliminated before me, and somehow I densely thought my job was not going to be affected. Well, I mean, I was worried that it would, but I somehow managed to make myself believe that I was not going to be on that list. Yeah. So genuinely blindsided. And so coming off of that, I think like you start questioning, do I even know anything that I know? And I just want to feel valuable. And something that I learned from working with clients, the biggest thing that I've learned, and the biggest like takeaway in my whole business, is that like I'm enough, and me just showing up as me and putting in what I am capable of putting in is enough to get really good results, to build really good trust, to build really good relationships, and to make money. And corporate never made me feel like that. Corporate always made me feel like I am not enough. I am not good enough. I'm too young. I'm too inexperienced. I'm too far away. For some reason, there is a reason not to pay me more. There is a reason not to give me opportunities always. And in this scenario, it's the complete opposite. It's like literally just showing up as you is worth getting paid to do what you can do. That's amazing. So
It's incredible.
yeah. So that's a happy one. Let's leave on that thought.
We'll leave on that note.
So tell us your crazy client stories and also your biggest lessons that you learned from working with clients. We want all the tea. So come and tell us. You can find us on Instagram at Big Brave Business, and we want to hear from you.
Please, and send in all your questions. I have a feeling that we will be doing another episode about clients soon. I think this is a great discussion, and there's so many interesting stories and things that we have all learned from our clients. So if you have questions, please send them to us. We would want to answer them. And we definitely want to hear from you. So tune in next week. We're going to talk some more tea, I think.
We're being big and brave.
Big and brave and talking all the things. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Bye.